Welcome to the Action Campaign's video series explaining the legislative provisions of the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act of 2023. In this video, Jennifer and I will discuss Section 203, which simplifies and improves the housing credit student rule. Jennifer, could you tell me about the student rule and the challenges it is causing housing credit residents and property managers?
I'd be happy to, Ariane. When Congress created the housing credit, it wanted to make sure the program wasn't used to develop dormitory housing for full-time students and didn't want college kids to be able to live in housing credit units as off-campus housing if their parents could afford to pay for their apartments. So Congress put in place a rule that barred households made up of entirely full-time students from living in a housing credit property. Over the years, Congress has enacted a number of exceptions to the student rule, but it still has the unintended result of preventing low-income residents and housing credit properties from going back to school to get a degree, which can be essential for them to eventually build more assets and ensure self-sufficiency.
Wait, are you saying that someone living in a housing credit property who wants to go back to school to change careers would have to go part-time or else they'd lose their home?
That's exactly what I'm saying, unfortunately. It has caused a lot of unintended consequences.
Does HUD have a similar rule?
Yes, but the HUD student rule only applies to students under the age of 24. The HUD student rule also has some exceptions that differ from those allowed under the housing credit student rule. There are some other differences as well. The housing credit student rule only applies to full-time students, whereas the HUD student rule also applies to part-time students. Also, a single adult student in a HUD property can make the whole household ineligible, whereas under the housing credit student rule, all household members must be students in order for the household to be ineligible.
That sounds really confusing, especially as we know the vast majority of housing credit properties also have some HUD funding in them. What happens in those cases? Do you have to comply with both the housing credit and the HUD student rules?
Exactly. It's very confusing for tenants and property managers. A household might qualify to live in the property under the HUD student rule, but not under the housing credit student rule, or vice versa.
So how does the AHCIA fix the problem?
So first of all, rather than having to comply with two different student rules, properties financed with both the housing credit and any HUD program would only need to comply with the HUD student rule. Second, the bill replaces the existing housing credit student rule with a simplified rule that would better achieve Congress's intended purpose. Like the HUD student rule, the new housing credit student rule would only apply to adult students under the age of 24. But it would still only apply to full-time students and not part-time students, and the household would only be ineligible if all household members were students.
Are there any exceptions under this new housing credit student rule?
There are. Full-time, all-student households would still be eligible to live in a housing credit apartment if a household member is a single parent, was a formerly homeless youth, or a person who aged out of the foster system. There are also exceptions if a member of the household was a victim of domestic violence, sexual assault, or stalking, covered by the Violence Against Women Act, a victim of human trafficking, or a veteran.
Thanks, Jennifer. For more on our video series, visit the Action Campaign's website at rentalhousingaction.org.